The moment my daughter took the microphone, Patricia's smile disappeared. Not slowly. Not politely. It vanished so fast I knew she understood something before I did. The auditorium had been restless a second earlier. Parents shifting and folding seats, programs rustling, someone coughing near the side aisle, a baby fussing in the back. Then Lily stood at the podium in her blue graduation gown, looked past the dean, past the faculty, past 300 people in pressed linen and pearl earrings. She looked directly at the woman who had just called me the maid. And she said, "Before I thank anyone else, I need to tell you who my mother is." That was the moment every conversation in the room stopped. That was also the moment I realized my daughter had heard everything. 20 minutes earlier, I had been sitting in the back row trying to make myself smaller. I arrived early because I was afraid of being late. That had been a habit since Lily was little. When you are a single mother, lateness becomes one more thing people use against you. Late to teacher conferences, late with lunch money, late with rent, late with permission slips. People called it disorganization. They rarely called it survival. The college auditorium smelled like floor polish flowers and expensive perfume. Sunlight came through tall windows along the left wall, falling across rows of families dressed like catalog photos. Fathers in navy blazers, mothers in silk dresses, grandparents holding bouquets wrapped in tissue paper. You could always tell which families had packed for a weekend celebration and which ones had simply made it there. I was the second kind. My dress was dark green and old enough to have softened at the seams. I had ironed it in the motel bathroom that morning with a towel over the counter because the iron left brown water spots. It was the only dress I brought. Not because I wanted sympathy. Because the zipper still worked and it looked decent if I kept my cardigan on. I sat in the back because I did not know where else to go. Lily had sent me 1 ticket and 3 heart emojis. No instructions. No sit with us. No Ethan's family saved you a seat. Just the ticket. At first I told myself that was normal. She was busy. Graduation week was chaotic. Her phone had been full of group photos, dinner reservations, last-minute cap decorating, and scholarship emails. Still, I noticed the empty space. Mothers notice what children leave unsaid. I spotted Lily near the stage before she saw me. She stood with a cluster of honor students, laughing carefully with her hand near her collarbone. That was her nervous gesture. She had done it since 6th grade. Back then, it meant a girl named Brianna had asked why Lily's sneakers came from Walmart. Now it meant she was standing beside Ethan Caldwell. Tall, handsome, comfortable. The kind of young man who had never wondered if a debit card would decline at a grocery store. His family sat 3 rows from the front. I knew because Patricia Caldwell was impossible to miss. Cream suit. Gold bracelet. Hair shaped into effortless softness that probably took an hour. She looked like women I cleaned houses for when Lily was in middle school. Women who apologized for the mess while living in homes larger than my entire duplex. I recognized her before she recognized me. We had met once over FaceTime. Patricia had smiled warmly then. Too warmly. The kind of warmth that never touches the eyes. I was trying to find Lily's name in the printed program when Patricia turned around. Her gaze landed on me. Moved over my cardigan. My dress. My sensible shoes. Then returned to my face. There was no shock in her expression. Only confirmation. Like she had been told something and found evidence. She leaned toward the woman beside her. I should have looked away. Instead, I heard her. Is that her actual mother? The other woman glanced back quickly. Patricia's mouth curved. She looks like the maid. The words were not loud. That was what made them worse. They were designed to be overheard only by the right people. A clean little cruelty. No mess. No accountability. The woman beside her covered her mouth, but I saw the smile. I looked down at my program. Lily's name blurred. For a second, I was not in a college auditorium anymore. I was in the elementary school office counting crumpled bills for a field trip. I was in a grocery aisle putting back strawberries because milk mattered more. I was in a diner uniform at 11 at night, smelling like fryer oil, helping Lily memorize state capitals between coffee refills. I had built a life out of saying no to myself. No new coat. No dentist until next month. No sleep after double shifts. No crying where Lily could hear. I did not resent the sacrifice. I resented being reduced to it. I stood slowly. Not dramatically. Just enough to leave. My purse strap caught on the metal chair beside me. I freed it carefully because even humiliation has manners when you have spent your life not wanting to cause a scene. I told myself Lily would understand. Maybe she would not even notice. Maybe that was better. Then a voice from the stage said, "Excuse me." It was Lily. I looked up. She stood at the microphone. The dean beside her seemed confused but not alarmed. Lily had won the Senior Leadership Award. She was supposed to speak later, I realized. Not now. Not like this. Her hands were steady on the podium. Too steady. That was how I knew she was angry. Ethan turned in his seat. Patricia froze. Lily looked directly at her. Then she looked at me. Not toward the back row generally. At me. For one painful second I wanted to shake my head. Don't do this. Don't make yourself visible for me. That had been my deepest, quietest wish for years. That my daughter would not have to carry my class, my exhaustion, my old dress, my unpaid bills, my history. I wanted her free of me. Maybe that was love. Maybe it was shame wearing love's clothes. Lily leaned closer to the microphone. My mother is sitting in the back row, she said. The auditorium quieted. She worked nights for most of my childhood. She cleaned offices after closing, waited tables on weekends, and still made it to every parent-teacher conference smelling like lemon cleaner and coffee. A few people turned. Not all. Enough. My face burned. Patricia did not move. Lily continued. She wore the same winter coat for 9 years so I could have textbooks, school trips, and a laptop that didn't shut off during exams. I gripped my purse strap. Hard. She never told me that part. I figured it out later. Her voice stayed calm. That made it worse. Or better. I could not tell. Then Lily paused. Her eyes moved back to Patricia. And today someone looked at her and saw a maid. A ripple moved through the room. Not outrage. Recognition. The uncomfortable kind. Lily's voice lowered. I saw the woman who made this day possible. Patricia's face changed then. The color drained slowly from her cheeks. Ethan looked at his mother, then at Lily, then down at his hands. For the first time since I had known him, he looked young. Lily held the silence a second longer. Not to punish. To make people sit with what they had heard. Then she said, "So before I thank this university, my professors, or anyone else, I want to thank my mother." My legs felt unsteady. I sat back down because standing suddenly seemed impossible. The applause began somewhere near the middle rows. Small at first, then wider. But I barely heard it. I was looking at my daughter, and she was still looking at me. Not embarrassed. Not ashamed. Not hiding me. For 18 years I had taught myself to stay in the back so she could move forward. But as Lily stood there holding that microphone, I realized something I should have known much sooner. Children do not only inherit what we give them, they inherit what we teach them to be ashamed of. And my daughter had just handed that shame back to the room it came from. I woke up the next morning with mascara still under my eyes. Not because I had cried dramatically, just quietly. The way exhausted women cry when nobody is watching anymore. The motel room smelled like stale air conditioning and motel coffee. My green dress hung from the shower rod beside the sink, wrinkled again despite everything. For a moment I stared at it. Then I folded it carefully anyway. Some habits survive humiliation. My phone buzzed twice on the nightstand. One message from Lily. Another from a number I did not recognize. I opened Lily's first. "I'm sorry." That was all it said. No explanation. No for what. Just those 2 words. I read them 3 times. Then I opened the second message. It was from Patricia Caldwell. "I think we should talk." I set the phone down immediately. Not out of anger. Out of exhaustion. Outside the motel window, families were loading SUVs with flower bouquets and graduation balloons. I watched a grandfather struggle to fit a giant stuffed bear into the trunk, while 2 teenage girls laughed beside him. Normal people moving through a normal morning. That was the strange thing about humiliation. The world never pauses for it. I drove across town to the diner Lily liked near campus. She had texted me the address at midnight. When I walked in, she was already there in sweatpants and an oversized university sweatshirt, stirring cream into untouched coffee. Her graduation makeup was gone. She looked 22 again instead of invincible. She stood when she saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she hugged me hard enough to wrinkle my coat. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time her voice cracked. I held her anyway. The waitress seated us by the window. Lily kept twisting her paper napkin into smaller and smaller pieces while we looked at the menus. Neither of us was reading them. Finally she said, "Mom." I didn't know she'd say something like that. I nodded once. "I know. She's always judgmental, but rich people usually hide it better." Lily flinched slightly. I regretted the sentence immediately. Not because it was false, because I heard bitterness in my own voice. The waitress came for our order. Lily asked for pancakes she would barely touch. I ordered oatmeal because it was the cheapest thing without thinking. Lily noticed. That hurt more than Patricia's comment somehow. "Mom," she said quietly, "you don't have to do that anymore." I looked out the window. "You'd be surprised how long survival habits last." She didn't answer. A man in a baseball cap entered carrying flowers for someone. A little girl ran behind him dragging a graduation balloon across the floor. Lily watched them too. Then she said, "I didn't invite my friends to the apartment in high school." I looked back at her. "I know." "No, I really didn't." Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "I always made excuses. I stayed quiet." That was another thing single mothers learn early. Sometimes silence gives your child permission to tell the truth. Lily swallowed hard. When people asked where I lived, I'd joke about how tiny the apartment was before anyone else could. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. I thought if I embarrassed myself first, she continued, it would hurt less. That sentence landed slowly, carefully, like something fragile being set down between us. I remembered Lily at 14 refusing to let me walk her into school during a rainstorm because my car rattled when it idled. At 16, insisting I drop her off a block away from a birthday party. At 17, begging me not to wear my diner uniform into the grocery store near campus tours. Back then, I told myself those were normal teenage things. Now I wondered how much shame had been hiding inside them. "I never blamed you," Lily said quickly. "I know. But I was embarrassed sometimes." There it was. Clean. Simple. More painful because of it. I stirred my oatmeal even though it had gone cold. Lily looked terrified suddenly. Like honesty itself might destroy something. Then she whispered, "I hated myself for feeling that way." I looked at her finally. Really looked. The dark circles under her eyes. The tension in her shoulders. The way she kept rubbing her thumb against the edge of the mug. My daughter had spent years trying to become someone nobody could dismiss. And somewhere along the way she started fearing the woman who raised her might make that harder. Not because Lily was cruel. Because America teaches people very early which lives look respectable. The waitress brought our food. Neither of us touched it for a while. Then Lily said softly, "Patricia knew more than she should have." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She asked questions. "What kind of questions?" Lily hesitated too long. Questions with pauses are usually worse than answers. She asked if you rented. Lily admitted. If you ever remarried, what kind of work you did. I felt heat rise behind my ribs. "And you told her?" "Not everything." "Not no." I leaned back slowly. Lily's eyes filled immediately. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered to her. I know that now. The waitress refilled our coffee cups. Lily waited until she walked away before speaking again. At first, Patricia acted supportive. She kept saying how proud she was that I worked hard. Lily laughed once, a humorless sound. But eventually I realized she talked about me the same way people talk about rescue dogs. I looked down. She'd tell her friends I was resilient. Lily made air quotes with both hands. Like poverty was some inspirational hobby. I almost smiled despite myself. Almost. Then she said quietly, "Ethan noticed it too." That surprised me. He never said anything. He avoids conflict. There was affection in Lily's voice when she said it. But disappointment too. A dangerous combination. I thought about Ethan sitting frozen beside his mother during the ceremony. Good boys often become quiet men. And quiet men sometimes let ugly things survive because confrontation feels impolite. Lily looked exhausted suddenly. I thought college would make me feel equal to everyone she admitted, but sometimes I still feel like a visitor pretending to belong. The honesty in her voice nearly undid me. Not because it shocked me. Because I recognized it. I had felt that way in every clean suburban kitchen I ever scrubbed. Every school fundraiser. Every parent dinner. Every bank office with soft carpet and people who never checked price tags. Pretending belonging becomes its own kind of labor. Lily pushed her pancakes aside untouched. I heard her yesterday before you stood up, she said quietly. I froze. What? I heard Patricia. The diner noise seemed to fade around us. Lily stared down at her plate. I saw you reach for your purse. Her voice cracked again. And I knew you were leaving. I looked away. There are moments when mothers realize their children saw far more than intended. This was one of them. Lily wiped her eyes quickly. I think I've spent years trying to make people respect me enough that they'd never treat you that way. I didn't answer immediately. Because somewhere deep down I had done the same thing. Spent years trying to become invisible enough that Lily could move through the world untouched by my struggles. And maybe both of us had been building our lives around the same fear. Not poverty itself. Judgment. Then Lily said something that stayed with me long after breakfast ended. She didn't look shocked when she saw you yesterday. I frowned slightly. Lily met my eyes. She looked disappointed. A chill moved through me. Like I asked carefully. Like I wasn't who she thought I was. The scholarship dinner was held at a country club 30 minutes outside campus. The kind with stone columns, valet parking, and women who said summering instead of vacation. I almost did not go. Lily asked me twice. The first time casually. The second time quietly. That second voice was the reason I said yes. I spent an hour deciding whether the green dress still looked acceptable after the graduation ceremony. In the end, I wore it again with different earrings and convinced myself nobody would notice. Women like me become experts at rearranging the same life into different versions. The country club sat behind iron gates and trimmed hedges shaped into careful curves. A teenage valet opened my car door, glanced at the cracked dashboard of my Toyota, then recovered his expression fast enough to remain polite. That was another American skill. Making judgment look professional. Inside the ballroom glowed with soft amber lighting and too many flowers. University banners hung beside framed oil paintings of men who probably donated buildings. Lily stood near the entrance beside Ethan. When she saw me, relief crossed her face before she hid it. That hurt more than if she had looked embarrassed. Because relief meant she had been worried. She hugged me tightly. You came. I said I would. I know. Ethan smiled when he greeted me, but it looked strained around the eyes. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Still, he seemed uncomfortable in it tonight. That made me like him more. Patricia arrived 10 minutes later with her husband, Robert Caldwell. Robert was quieter than his wife. Expensive watch, tired posture, the kind of man who spent 40 years making money and no longer knew how to stop. Patricia kissed Lily's cheek carefully without smudging her lipstick. Then she looked at me. Not coldly. That would have been easier. She looked at me politely. Like someone trying to recover a social situation without admitting fault. I'm glad you could make it, she said. I nodded once. So am I. We stood there half a second too long. Then Ethan stepped between us slightly. Tiny movement. But I noticed. Women always notice who positions themselves between tension. Dinner tables filled slowly around us. Donors, faculty members, scholarship students' families. Waiters carried trays of wine glasses through the room while a jazz trio played near the stage. Lily's scholarship advisor introduced herself to me warmly. You must be very proud, she said. I am. She's exceptional. I smiled politely. Nobody ever says single mothers are exceptional for surviving. Only children who escape it. The seating cards placed me beside a retired dentist and his wife. Patricia sat across from me beside Ethan. Lily sat between them. Strategically, I suspected. The first 20 minutes passed peacefully enough. Bread baskets, wine pours, small conversations about internships and graduate programs. Then Patricia asked me where I lived now. Not rudely, Smoothly, like she was asking about weather. Still in Dayton, she asked. Yes. That must be difficult with your work schedule. I looked up. What do you mean? She smiled lightly. Well, commuting, long shifts, service work can be exhausting. There it was. Not insult. Classification. The dentist's wife lowered her eyes toward her salad. Everyone at the table heard it. Nobody interrupted. I cut my chicken slowly before answering. It can be tiring. Patricia nodded sympathetically. The performance almost impressed me. Lily stared hard at her plate. Ethan shifted in his chair. Then Patricia added, Lily told us how hard you worked for her. It's really admirable. The word admirable sat between us like something taxidermied. Dead and posed attractively. I set down my fork. She worked hard, too. Of course, Patricia said quickly. That's why Ethan loves her. Loves. Present tense. But conditional things always sound confident at first. The jazz trio played softly while conversations rose around the ballroom. Somewhere behind us, someone laughed too loudly about ski season. Patricia sipped her wine. Then she asked, Did Lily ever tell you Ethan's father funded the new arts center downtown? There it was again. Status offered casually like background music. No, I said. Robert looked tired suddenly. Patricia continued anyway. Our family's been very involved in the community for years. I glanced toward Lily. She looked trapped. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Cornered. I recognized the feeling because I had spent most of my adult life inside it. Then the scholarship director stepped onto the stage for announcements. Conversation quieted. Students would each be recognized individually tonight. Future law students, medical researchers, teachers, engineers. Children polished into evidence of successful futures. Lily sat rigid beside me while names were called. When her turn came, the room applauded warmly. Lily Bennett, the director, announced recipient of the Hargrove Academic Leadership Fellowship. Lily stood. The applause continued longer than before. She deserved it. Every sleepless night. Every student loan form. Every panic attack she hid from me during finals. Every scholarship essay written beside laundromat dryers and diner booths. She deserved all of it. Then Patricia leaned toward a woman at the neighboring table. Not quietly enough. She's done incredibly well considering where she came from. I felt Lily freeze beside me. That sentence broke something small and invisible in the room. Not dramatic. Just final. Lily stood very still before walking toward the stage. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Robert stared at his untouched wine glass. I watched my daughter accept her award under warm stage lights while applause echoed through the ballroom. And for the first time I realized success had not protected her from class. It had only taught her how to navigate it more elegantly. After the ceremony portion ended, guests mingled near the dessert tables. Lily disappeared briefly with faculty members while Ethan approached me near the coffee station. He looked pale. You okay? I asked. He nodded too quickly. I'm sorry about my mom. I stirred sugar into my coffee slowly. She seems very proud of herself. He looked down immediately. That told me more than any defense could have. She grew up poor too, he said quietly. I blinked once. What? Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. My mom never talks about it publicly. I stared at him. She spent years reinventing herself after marrying my dad. The ballroom noise softened around us. Reinventing how? She hates reminders of where she came from. He hesitated. Especially public ones. I looked across the room toward Patricia laughing beside two donor couples. Perfect posture. Perfect jewelry. Perfect smile. Like the kind of woman who had always belonged there. Then Ethan said something that chilled me. My dad used to say my mother spent 30 years trying to make sure nobody could ever mistake her for the people she grew up with. I looked back at him slowly. And now I asked. Ethan swallowed hard. Now I think she's terrified Lily reminds her too much of them. Across the ballroom, Patricia looked directly at me. And for the first time I realized her cruelty had never really been about superiority. It was fear. Patricia Caldwell arrived at my motel room 3 days later wearing sunglasses large enough to hide half her face. She stood outside my door holding a paper coffee tray from Starbucks like a peace offering neither of us believed in. For a moment neither of us spoke. The motel ice machine hummed down the hallway. Someone's television played softly through a wall. Ordinary sounds around an extraordinary discomfort. "I know this is inappropriate," Patricia said finally. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because inappropriate had become the preferred language of wealthy people apologizing without using the word sorry. I stepped aside anyway. She entered carefully, looking around the small room without seeming to. Women like Patricia were trained observers. She noticed everything. The faded curtains. The pharmacy bag near the sink. The green dress hanging beside the bathroom door. Her eyes paused there half a second too long. Then she looked away. I handed her one of the motel chairs while I sat on the edge of the bed. The room suddenly felt painfully small. Patricia removed her sunglasses slowly. For the first time since meeting her, she looked tired instead of polished. Not broken. Just tired in an expensive way. "I embarrassed myself at the graduation," she said. I stayed quiet. She folded and unfolded a napkin around her coffee cup. "My husband thinks I owe you an apology." "And what do you think?" Her fingers stopped moving. "I think I said something cruel." Still careful. Still measured. Like she was negotiating language. I watched her for a moment before answering. "You didn't say it to me." Her eyes lifted. "You said it to another woman. You just didn't realize my daughter could hear you." Patricia looked down again. That silence told me more than denial would have. Outside, a siren passed faintly on the highway. Finally, she said, "Ethan told me you worked multiple jobs while raising Lily." I almost smiled. Not because of the compliment. Because people always sounded surprised by labor once a child succeeded. As though survival became noble only after producing acceptable results. "She was worth it," I said simply. Patricia nodded slowly. I'm sure she was. The room went quiet again. Then she looked toward the green dress. "That dress," she said carefully. "Where did you buy it?" I frowned slightly. "A clearance rack at Kohl's, years ago." Something flickered across her face. Recognition. Not judgment. Recognition. She stared into her coffee cup before speaking again. "My mother used to shop there." The sentence landed strangely between us. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just unexpectedly human. I waited. Patricia gave a short laugh without humor. "When I was 12, my mother bought me one church dress every August before school started." She looked toward the window. "I spent years praying nobody would recognize where it came from." I said nothing. Because suddenly I understood something important. Patricia had not spent her life avoiding poor people. She had spent it avoiding becoming visible as one again. That was different. And maybe sadder. She crossed one leg over the other carefully. "My father drove trucks," she continued. "My mother cleaned motel rooms." I glanced around my room automatically. Patricia noticed. "Yes," she said softly. "Places exactly like this." For the first time since meeting her, her voice lost its polished edges. "When I married Robert, his family made it very clear what kind of woman they expected him to marry." I leaned back slightly. "And what kind was that?" "Not my mother." The honesty startled both of us. Patricia looked embarrassed immediately afterward. Not for insulting me. For revealing herself. That was the first real thing she had done around me. I folded my hands together quietly. "So you spent your life becoming acceptable?" Her eyes lifted sharply. "Not angry." "Exposed." "Yes," she admitted. The word barely came out. Then she said something even quieter. "And I taught Ethan to do the same." The room felt smaller after that. Patricia removed her wedding ring slowly and turned it once against the table. "Robert's father hated me when we married," she said. "He thought I sounded cheap." I thought about her voice. Controlled, precise, every syllable carefully shaped. "You changed your accent," I realized. Patricia smiled faintly. "Among other things." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I asked the question sitting between us since graduation. "So why did you hate me immediately?" Her face tightened. Not defensive. Ashamed. "You walked into that auditorium wearing the exact expression my mother used to wear." I blinked once. "What expression?" She always looked grateful just to be invited into rooms where people judged her. The words hit harder than the original insult. Because they were true. Patricia swallowed carefully. And Lily looked proud of you. I frowned slightly. She is proud of me. I know that now. No bitterness. Only exhaustion. She rubbed at the edge of her coffee cup again. When Ethan started dating Lily, I told myself I admired her work ethic, her ambition, her resilience. Patricia laughed softly. That word wealthy people use when their relieved suffering happened to someone else. I looked away before she could see my reaction. Because despite everything, she was right. Patricia's eyes moved toward the green dress again. Then she said quietly, "The night before Ethan introduced us on FaceTime, Lily called me. Something inside me tightened. She asked me not to mention money during the conversation." I stared at her. She was afraid you'd feel uncomfortable. The room blurred briefly around the edges, not because Lily was ashamed exactly, because she had spent years managing emotional danger from every direction, protecting me from humiliation, protecting herself from judgment, protecting her future from class. Patricia continued carefully. "She told me you worked harder than anyone she knew." I swallowed once. But she also said she spent her entire childhood terrified people would look down on her because of where she came from. There it was. The inheritance neither of us intended to pass down. Patricia looked suddenly older sitting there in the motel chair. Not weaker. Just more visible. "We raised our children differently," she said quietly, "but I think we taught them the same fear." I didn't answer. Because somewhere deep down I knew she was right. Patricia stood a few minutes later and placed her untouched coffee in the trash near the sink. Before leaving, she paused beside the door. Then she looked at me directly. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "my mother would have liked you very much." After she left, I sat alone in the motel room staring at the green dress hanging beside the bathroom. For years I thought poverty was the hardest thing I survived. But sitting there alone, I realized something worse survives much longer. The fear of being seen as poor. And apparently even wealth couldn't cure it. That evening, Lily called crying. Not because of Patricia. Because she had just told Ethan she might not marry him after all. Lily moved into a short-term rental near campus 2 days after ending things with Ethan. Not officially ending. Just taking space. That was the phrase people used now when something important had already broken, but nobody wanted to say it aloud yet. She stopped answering most calls. Mine included. Not completely. Just enough to let me know she was alive. A heart reaction to a text. A single busy today. One blurry photo of takeout noodles beside her laptop. I recognized the behavior immediately. Lily withdrew when she felt ashamed. She inherited that from me. Back in Dayton, I returned to work the Monday after graduation. The office building smelled exactly the same as before I left. Industrial cleaner, burnt coffee, carpet dust trapped in recycled air. Nothing changes just because your heart does. I cleaned conference rooms while junior associates in expensive shoes rushed past, discussing mergers and vacation homes. Nobody looked at me twice. Normally that invisibility comforted me. Now it exhausted me. Around midnight, I found myself staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the 32nd floor conference room. Rubber gloves. Cheap sneakers. Hair tied back too tightly. For years, I believed dignity came from enduring hard things quietly. Now I wasn't sure anymore. My supervisor, Denise, noticed something was wrong before I admitted it. She cornered me beside the supply closet holding 2 vending machine coffees. "You look terrible," she said gently. "Thank you. I mean emotionally." That made me laugh despite myself. Denise had worked in commercial cleaning almost 20 years, divorced twice, 3 grown sons, smoked only when deeply stressed. She handed me a coffee. "So what happened?" I hesitated. Then unexpectedly I told her almost everything. The graduation. Patricia. Lily's speech. The motel conversation. Denise listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned against the wall and crossed her arms. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I doubt this story ends with the rich woman being the worst mother." I frowned slightly. "She humiliated me." "Yeah, and you spent 18 years teaching your daughter not to need anybody." The words hit harder than intended. Denise softened immediately. I'm not attacking you. I know. You survived the way women like us survive. She took a sip of coffee. But survival habits don't disappear just because your kid made it to college. I looked away. Because I suddenly remembered Lily at 8 years old asking whether she should stop inviting friends over. Not because anyone bullied her directly. Because children notice things. The peeling apartment ceiling. The thrift store couch. The electricity shutoff notice hidden under mail. I had hugged her and promised things would improve. But I never asked what shame had already settled inside her. Denise crushed her empty coffee cup thoughtfully. My oldest son still apologizes before asking for help, she said quietly. He grew up watching me panic over money. I didn't answer. Some damage sounds too familiar to argue with. That night after work, I stopped at the storage unit I had rented years earlier after downsizing apartments. Mostly old furniture. Boxes of school papers. Christmas decorations. Things too emotionally expensive to throw away. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof while I searched for Lily's childhood keepsakes. I found her third-grade spelling bee ribbon first. Then a stack of drawings. Then an old lunchbox covered in faded cartoon strawberries. At the bottom of one box sat dozens of folded napkins and sticky notes. Lunch notes. I opened one carefully. Good luck on your math test. Love you more than pancakes. Another. You don't have to be perfect today. Another. Proud of you for trying. I sat there on the concrete floor holding those tiny notes while rain echoed outside the storage unit. For years I believed love alone protected children. But love doesn't always erase fear. Sometimes children carry both at once. My phone buzzed around 10 that night. Ethan. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hi, he said quietly. He sounded exhausted. You okay? I asked automatically. Funny how motherhood leaks into every conversation eventually. No, he admitted. I waited. I think Lily hates me. She's hurt. I know. Rain drummed harder overhead. Ethan exhaled shakily. I should have said something at graduation. Yes. No hesitation. No rescue. He deserved honesty too. I've spent my whole life avoiding conflict with my mother, he admitted. Why? Silence. Then, because my father never did. That answer surprised me. Ethan continued carefully. My dad just learned how to survive her moods. Everyone did. I thought about Patricia sitting in the motel chair talking about reinventing herself. Fear creates strange households. She wasn't always like this, Ethan said softly. What changed? She got successful. The sentence sounded ridiculous at first. Then painfully logical. She became obsessed with appearances after my grandfather died, Ethan explained. Neighborhoods, schools, connections, manners, image. He laughed weakly. I think she spent 30 years trying to outrun embarrassment. I leaned against the storage box behind me. And you. Long pause. I learned to keep people comfortable. There it was. The inheritance passed from parent to child. Patricia feared humiliation. Ethan feared conflict. Lily feared judgment. And I feared visibility itself. Different symptoms. Same wound. Ethan's voice lowered. I love Lily. I believed him. That was the difficult part. But I think she's tired of being around people who treat love like social approval, he admitted. I closed my eyes briefly. Because that sentence applied to more than him. After the call ended, I sat alone in the storage unit for almost an hour. Rainwater slid beneath the metal door in tiny silver lines. I kept rereading one lunch note over and over. You don't have to be perfect today. I wondered how many years Lily spent believing the opposite anyway. The next afternoon, Patricia Caldwell appeared on local Facebook pages. Not because of the graduation speech directly. Because gossip in wealthy suburbs travels like perfume. Quietly. Everywhere. Someone posted a video clip from the ceremony. Then another parent shared a vague comment about classless behavior. Soon people were pretending not to discuss her while discussing her constantly. Church groups. Country club wives. School fundraiser boards. Patricia's social world had started turning cold around the edges. I should have enjoyed that. Instead, I felt tired. Punishment rarely heals what caused the cruelty. That evening, Lily finally called again. Her voice sounded raw. "I met Ethan today," she said. And she inhaled slowly. "I told him I don't know if I can spend my life proving myself acceptable to people." I leaned back in my kitchen chair quietly. Then Lily whispered something that stayed with me long after the call ended. "I think I've spent my whole life trying not to become you." The sentence hurt. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest. And somewhere deep inside I realized I had spent years trying to disappear so she never would. Patricia asked me to lunch on a Thursday afternoon. Not at the country club. Not somewhere polished enough to impress anyone. A diner off Interstate 75 with cracked vinyl booths and pie rotating beneath a fogged glass case. The kind of place women like Patricia usually drove past without noticing. That was how I knew she was trying. I arrived 10 minutes early out of habit. Patricia arrived exactly on time. She wore jeans. Expensive jeans. But still. Progress. When she slid into the booth across from me, she looked around once before smiling faintly. My mother used to take me places like this after church. I picked up my menu slowly. "You don't come anymore. Not unless nobody I know can see me." At least she was honest now. The waitress called us honey before filling our coffee cups. Patricia thanked her automatically, then looked surprised by her own tone. Like some older version of herself had spoken by accident. We ordered quietly. Soup for me. Salad for her. Neither of us came for food. Rain streaked softly across the windows while trucks rolled past outside. For a while we sat in silence. Not hostile. Just unfamiliar. Finally, Patricia folded her hands together carefully. "Ethan hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. I nodded once. "Lily barely speaks to me either." That landed between us heavily. Patricia stared down at the table. "I spent most of my life trying to protect my son from feeling ashamed. And now..." Her smile turned sad. "Now I think I taught him shame was something dangerous people deserved." I looked toward the rain outside. A father carried a sleeping toddler through the parking lot wrapped in a tiny pink blanket. Normal life continuing somewhere beside all this damage. Patricia's voice softened. "When Ethan was little, he loved inviting friends over." She laughed quietly. "I used to panic before every birthday party." "Why?" "I was terrified the other mothers would figure me out." I frowned slightly. "Figure out what?" "That I didn't belong with them." The honesty still startled me even now. Patricia reached for her coffee cup. My mother smoked discount cigarettes and wore supermarket perfume. She pronounced words wrong. She kept canned vegetables in old butter tubs. She looked embarrassed immediately afterward. Not because of her mother. Because she heard herself judging her. "I spent my entire childhood watching people smile politely at her," Patricia continued. "That kind of smile where they already decided your value." I knew the smile. Every working-class woman does. Patricia rubbed the edge of her napkin slowly. "When I married Robert, I promised myself nobody would ever look at me that way again." "And did it work?" She thought about that longer than I expected. "Sometimes." Honest again. That was becoming dangerous between us. The waitress brought our food. Patricia thanked her by name after reading the tag on her apron. Maybe guilt makes people more observant. Or maybe shame does. I stirred crackers into my soup quietly while Patricia stared at her untouched salad. Then she asked, "Did you ever resent Lily for wanting more than your life?" The question caught me off guard. Number. Not even a little. I looked down at the spoon in my hand. When she was 14, she told me she never wanted to worry about bills the way I did. Patricia stayed silent. I cried in the bathroom afterward, I admitted. But not because I was angry. Why then? Because she was right. Patricia exhaled slowly. I continued before fear stopped me. I wanted Lily to escape struggle. I just didn't realize she thought escaping struggle meant escaping me too. Patricia's face tightened slightly. "That wasn't your fault." "No," I said quietly, but it still shaped her. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Patricia pushed her salad around with her fork. "Robert says I became obsessed with appearances after we got wealthy." "Did you?" "Yes." No hesitation this time. Because I learned very early that people forgive almost anything except visible failure. I leaned back against the booth. And poor people are visible. Her eyes met mine. Yes. Neither of us looked away. A truck horn sounded faintly outside. The waitress refilled our coffee again. Patricia wrapped both hands around her mug afterward like she needed warmth from somewhere. My father used to come home exhausted every night, she said softly, but my mother still ironed his work shirts before bed because she believed looking respectable mattered. I thought about my own mother sewing coat buttons back on after factory shifts. Women exhausting themselves to make struggle appear cleaner. Patricia swallowed carefully. I judged you at graduation because you looked comfortable being exactly who you were. I almost laughed. Comfortable. You sat there in that old dress without apologizing for it. I stared at her. Because the truth was I had spent years apologizing internally for everything. My apartment. My paycheck. My car. My accent after long shifts. My exhaustion. Patricia continued quietly. My mother never learned how to stop apologizing for herself either. Something inside me softened then. Not forgiveness, exactly. Recognition. We sat quietly for a while after that. Two aging women shaped differently by the same fear. One hid her past beneath money. The other hid herself beneath humility. Neither strategy protected our children. Eventually, Patricia reached into her purse and removed a folded photograph. She slid it across the table. A young Patricia stood beside a trailer home in faded jeans and a waitress uniform. Beside her stood a woman with cigarette-thin wrists and tired eyes. Her mother. I studied the picture carefully. Then I looked back up. She looks proud of you. Patricia's eyes filled immediately. She died before Ethan was born. I handed the photo back gently. You know, I said quietly, Lily still keeps the lunch notes I packed in elementary school. Patricia smiled weakly. Ethan still calls me when he can't sleep. The rain finally began slowing outside. Patricia folded the photograph carefully before returning it to her purse. Then she looked at me directly. I am sorry, she said. Not polished. Not careful. Just tired and real. I believed her. That surprised both of us. As we stood to leave, Patricia hesitated near the diner entrance. Then she asked softly, "Do you think Lily and Ethan still have a chance?" I looked out toward the wet parking lot. I think they're trying to decide whether love is enough when people inherit fear from their parents. Patricia nodded slowly, because finally both of us understood what our children were really fighting. Not class. Not money. Shame. And shame survives long after circumstances change. That night Lily called again. This time her voice sounded calmer. But what she said next made my chest tighten immediately. "Mom," she whispered, "I told Ethan something I've never admitted to anyone before. Lily called me just after midnight. I answered on the first ring." For a second, neither of us spoke. I could hear traffic faintly through her phone, a passing siren somewhere far away, wind against a car window. "Where are you?" I asked quietly. "Outside Ethan's apartment." I sat up straighter in bed. "You okay?" "I think so." Her voice sounded steadier than it had in weeks. Not happier. Just clearer. Sometimes clarity arrives long before peace does. I waited. Then Lily exhaled slowly. "I told him I spent half my life trying to become someone nobody could look down on." I closed my eyes briefly. "And what did he say?" "That he spent half his life learning not to upset people." The sadness in her laugh nearly broke me. Two good children raised inside different versions of fear. I listened while Lily explained the conversation. She and Ethan had walked for hours through campus neighborhoods after dinner, past brick dorms, closed coffee shops, empty benches where students once crowded during warmer months. No screaming. No dramatic breakup. Just two exhausted people finally speaking honestly. "He admitted he freezes whenever his mother gets critical," Lily said quietly, "even when he disagrees with her. That kind of thing starts young." "I know." A pause. "Mom, I think I learned it too." I stayed silent. Because she had. Just differently. Lily learned to shrink discomfort before it happened, to anticipate judgment, to manage perception carefully enough that nobody would use her background against her. I taught her survival. The world taught her shame. Together, those lessons became something heavy. I told Ethan I don't want to spend my marriage performing worthiness, Lily whispered. The sentence settled inside me slowly. For years I thought success would protect her from humiliation. Instead, it simply moved the humiliation into quieter rooms. I heard Ethan's voice faintly through the phone then. Not words. Just presence. Lily laughed softly. He's pacing. Sounds nervous. He should be. That made both of us smile slightly. A tiny thing. But real. The next weekend, Lily invited me to dinner at a small restaurant halfway between campus and Dayton. Nothing expensive. Italian food served on chipped plates with candles too short for their holders. When I arrived, Ethan stood as soon as he saw me. Nervous again. Good. Nervous people still care. Lily hugged me first. Longer than usual. Then Ethan surprised me by speaking before anyone sat down. I owe you an apology. Direct. No excuses. I respected that immediately. You didn't insult me, I said. No, he admitted, but I let it happen. The restaurant noise softened around us briefly. I looked at him carefully. Young men are often rewarded for calmness even when calmness becomes cowardice. Ethan looked terrified anyway. That gave me hope. I love your daughter, he said quietly, but I think I spent too much time trying to keep everyone comfortable. Lily reached for his hand under the table. Small movement. Easy to miss. Not to me. The waitress arrived before I could answer. Bread basket, water glasses, routine interruptions saving people from emotional exposure. We ordered quietly. After she left, Ethan looked at Lily once before speaking again. I told my mother she doesn't get to decide whether someone belongs in our family based on class. Lily blinked slightly. You actually said that? She cried. I raised an eyebrow. That must have been traumatic for everyone involved. Even Ethan laughed at that. The tension eased after that. Not disappeared. Eased. Important difference. Over dinner we talked about ordinary things for the first time since graduation. Lily's graduate fellowship, Ethan's architecture internship, apartment prices, student debt, Robert Caldwell's sudden obsession with gardening after retirement. Normal conversation returning carefully after weeks of emotional wreckage. Halfway through dinner, Lily excused herself to the restroom. The moment she disappeared, Ethan looked at me seriously. I know she still feels ashamed sometimes. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. So do you. He looked startled, then thoughtful. My mother spent years teaching me success meant never looking vulnerable, he admitted. That's exhausting. It is. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Ethan asked something unexpected. Were you ever angry at Lily for being embarrassed growing up? I answered honestly. Sometimes I was hurt. He nodded slowly. But mostly I continued I was afraid she'd inherit my fear of never being enough. Ethan looked down at his hands. I think both our families did that in different ways. Exactly. When Lily returned, her eyes moved carefully between us. You two okay? We survived, I said. Barely. Later that evening after dinner ended, we walked together toward the parking lot beneath soft yellow streetlights. The air smelled like rain again. Lily stopped beside my car. Then she hugged me unexpectedly hard. I spent years thinking strength meant becoming nothing like you, she whispered. My chest tightened immediately. She pulled back before continuing. But now I think strength was watching you survive without becoming cruel. I looked away for a second because suddenly I could not breathe correctly. Not from pain. From relief. The kind that arrives quietly after years of carrying something invisible. Ethan stood nearby, pretending not to witness the moment. Polite boy. Lily smiled through tears. You know what the worst part is? She asked softly. What? I think Patricia understands you better than I did for a long time. I laughed weakly. That's deeply upsetting. It's also true. We stood there smiling sadly at each other beneath the parking lot lights. 3 people trying to unlearn inheritances they never consciously chose. Before leaving, Ethan touched Lily's shoulder gently. We're having dinner with my parents next Sunday, he said carefully. Lily groaned immediately. I was having such a good evening too. But she smiled afterward. That mattered. As I drove home that night, I realized something I should have understood years earlier. Children do not need perfect parents. They need parents willing to stop passing pain forward once they finally recognize it. The next Sunday, Patricia greeted me at her front door differently. Not warmly. Not awkwardly. Honestly. And for the first time since meeting her, neither of us performed anything at all. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and whether you think children inherit fear more easily than love.